Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Two Missing Fiancés. Chapter 1. The train car bounced over every link in the track, as Elise Keefe sat with her nose in a book. She hated long trips, but at least she'd come prepared with 4 books in her bag and plenty of sandwiches for moments of hunger. The few dollars she had would be enough to purchase cheese and bread at their stops should she run out, but otherwise Elise felt ready for the more than 1,800-mile ride. Traveling from New York to Colorado was no easy task. 3 weeks by train and then half a day by stagecoach was a recipe for exhaustion, but it would be worth it. All of her hopes and dreams were waiting for her there. Leaving the country's largest city of New York was nothing to her now. Once upon a time, there was no place like her hometown, even with the near poverty and the clamorous nature of the city of over 800,000 people. Elise and her sister Maren had been raised smack dab in the middle of the slums of 5 Points. First-generation Americans, their parents had emigrated from their homeland of Ireland in 1836, 9 years before the exodus resulting from the Great Famine had swept through the land bringing mass starvation and disease. Although 5 Points had scarcely been a better place than Ireland when they arrived, and Elise had been born that same year. However, things had definitely worsened. Thugs and violence ruled the streets. Walking down Old Brewery Road was asking for trouble. Murder was common as people tried to end their disputes with a knife or a pipe. Employment was scarce and far too many women found work selling their bodies for a meal. Elise had been able to overlook it all, her eyes focused firmly on her dreams of the future. She focused completely on her own and her sister's well-being. Since she was a child, Elise would take Maren, her younger sister by 9 years, for walks along Broadway, where Phineas T. Barnum had his museum. His collection of bizarre and educational attractions was a source of enjoyment for them, one their father encouraged as it kept them safely out of harm's way when they weren't cloistered indoors with their studies. It also meant their eyes could not behold the secret shame he tried to hide. Sadly, he hadn't taken his own advice to stay where it was safe, and his secret had brought him to his end. It had been a year since Colm Keefe was murdered and almost as long since their mother's suicide. Elise's mother Maeve had depended entirely upon her husband, something that her eldest daughter had admired. In Elise's mind, such dependency was a sign of her mother's continued faith in their father despite the circumstances. Elise never dreamed that it ran so deep. Her mother had spiraled rapidly out of control after her father was killed behind a bar that previous spring. Grief and worry for the future overtook her and gnawed at her mind. It was Elise who found her hanging from a beam in their kitchen, 2 bowls of broth steaming on the table for her and her sister when they returned home from their walk. Elise had shielded Maren from the sight, sending her to a neighbor while the proper authorities were called to collect her mother's body. Maeve had joined her husband in a pauper's grave. It was a sobering reality that left Elise and Maren alone. Despite it all, Elise would have persisted with their life, determined to make it better and see her and her sister out of 5 Points in time, if not for Rob Clary. A notorious gangster and proprietor of young women, his roving eye had found interest in her pretty sister. Elise's maternal instincts had gone into overdrive and a need for an escape, sooner rather than later, had become imperative. Maren was beautiful. She stood 3 inches taller than Elise, who was average in height. Elise's slender frame gave her the appearance of an adolescent more than the 24-year-old she was. Her sister, on the other hand, had inherited their mother's comely appearance with full womanly curves and a small waist. Her cinnamon hair was wavy and always confined in a thick braid or bun. Her nose was straight, while Elise had a negligible bend in hers from a childhood fall. Maren's appearance was enviable, and Elise was not ashamed to admit that she did look on her sister's fair appearance with greater appreciation than her own, but that was not all that made Maren a magnet to the opposite sex. Maren was not only physically appealing but had a bubbly personality and a sweetness and innocence of youth due to her overprotective sister's efforts. Elise had always done everything to protect her, and she was not about to see it all go to waste because some serpent-tongued hooligan wanted what the likes of him ought never to possess. Her decision was made, and Beryl Tully's marriage office had been the platform for their salvation. How much longer? Marin asked from beside her. She was never one familiar with patience, and the fault in that lay squarely at Alice's own feet, she knew. How would I know, Mary, she replied, calling her sister by her nickname, as her eyes remained focused on the book she was reading. It's my first time traveling, too, remember? I know, but you always know everything, Marin replied as she turned to look at her. Would you put that away? She complained. You're missing it. Missing what? Alice questioned distractedly. Everything. Alice looked up in exasperation. If it were not for the fact that her sister's determination would not allow her a moment's peace until she complied, she would never have done so, but she obligingly put her book down. Alice's breath caught at the sight that lay displayed before her. She'd never seen anything so beautiful in her entire life. As a child, her mother had told her stories of Ireland, of emerald green hills and the roaring seaside town she'd been born in. Alice had tried her best to imagine such a place, but nothing she could have conceived could compare to the splendor that lay before her now. The fall colors had overwhelmed every tree in sight, and the grass was green-tipped with gold beneath the noon sky. There was nothing but miles of fields and flowers as far as the eye could see. Mary, she gasped in wonder. I told you, her sister answered with equal awe. Have you ever seen such a thing? Never. Are we really going to live in a place like this? With beauty like this? Marin questioned. We are, and we will never have to see the likes of 5 Points again, Alice replied with zeal. The day they'd turned their backs on their home was the best day of her life, and more was surely yet to come. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than of the former, she whispered the Bible verse to herself as Marin's arm wound tightly around her own. Her sister placed her chin upon her shoulder. It's going to be a wonderful life, Marin stated. Alice could see the smile lifting her cheeks. What makes you think so? She answered, giving her sister's arm a gentle squeeze. Anything that begins like this has to have a wonderful end, Marin replied. Plus, you're going to meet your husband, and I'm going to meet mine, she added with glee. What could be better? Alice's hopes were not as high as her sister's, though she was not the type to express it. Life had taught her never to put all her faith in a man's works or his word, but rather in God. Marin was still learning that truth, and though a marriage had been the means of their salvation, their unions were for entirely different reasons. Marin's was love. Do you think he'll be tall? Marin continued. Who? Ned, her sister replied, shifting to look up at her. There was childlikeness in the way she glowed at the mention of the man's name. How 8 months of correspondence had changed her. Beryl Tully, the stern and every business-minded proprietor of the marriage board, had been shocked when she learned that the girls could not only read but write and were versed in many areas of genteel behavior that she herself was not accustomed to. Alice smiled, remembering the woman's comments. You are some cultured girls, ain't ya? How's the likes of you end up here? How indeed. Alice listened as Marin raved about Ned Rogers, the man her sister was engaged to marry. He was 23, and his brother, John, 4 years older, was contracted to marry Alice. It was a happy arrangement for Marin that saw the sisters set to wed 2 brothers, ensuring that they would not be separated and that Alice could be there to make sure the young man treated her sister with respect. It had all been arranged by Beryl, whose guarantees of happiness lined the walls of her small office on Center Street. I hope he is, Alice answered. Or he'll look a sight next to you, she mused. Don't tease me, Marin answered. It's not my fault I'm tall. No, it's not. Alice continued to chuckle. But it does so amuse me to fret you about it. Marin pinched her sister's arm playfully. Well, you better pray that John doesn't have crooked teeth and a fat nose, she countered. Then we'll see who'll be laughing at whom. You'd wish the likes of that on me? Alice retaliated in feigned shock. I would. And a limp for good measure. Her sister laughed. Now Marin Athne braid a keef, you take that back. You know words have power, Elise answered more sternly. You remember what Father taught us? Yes, Elise. The Lord created by speaking, and we create by speaking too, Marin recited. Good. Now, don't you forget it. Their father's teaching still held sway in Ailey's life, even if his own walk with God had veered in his latter days. Marin smirked. Ailey's, you don't really believe that, do you? I do, Ailey's answered sincerely. I believe we forge our destiny by the words we speak and what we believe ourselves capable of. But what could possibly go wrong now? Marin questioned. Everything's been arranged. There's nothing to worry about. Nothing I could say at this point could be of any harm to us, she insisted. Nothing is over until it's over, Ailey's answered. And until a ring is on each of our fingers, I'm taking nothing for granted. I'll just have to take it for granted for us, Marin answered and resettled her head against her sister's shoulder again. Ailey's turned her eyes back to the window. Minutes later, she felt the weight of her sister's head grow heavier. Lord, for her sake, let all be well. Chapter 2. Ailey's was dreaming of a place she'd never been, the vision of it all concocted in her mind by the stories she'd heard and the fantasies she'd indulged in 1,000 times. The University of the Protestant Ascendancy was the school where her father had lettered in philosophy and literature. Her father, Colm, had not been a foolish man. He was taken on as a professor at the very college he'd attended, and he'd worked hard to find his place in Irish society from meager beginnings. But a desire for more had lured him to America's shores. He left Ireland with an invitation to lecture at a prominent New York university, a prospect which should have taken his family into affluence and distinction. It didn't. Whilst on the 21-day journey across the sea, his invitation was rescinded, due to the political finagling of a competing local professor whose uncle was Catholic and a high-ranking official in the mayor's office. A Protestant, Colm stood no chance against him in a society whose corruption permeated not only government, but religion. He arrived with Maeve to the apathetic apologies of his would-be employers, who not only had given his job away but his home as well. Suddenly, they had no source of income nor a roof over their heads. All they possessed was that which they had arrived with. Maeve learned of her pregnancy soon after. Colm had done his best to find alternative employment, but a society that preferred Catholics and was controlled by the corrupt gave him little options for a man of experience. He was forced to fall back on a trade and had become a carpenter like his father. The decent home he was able to procure for them soon became a burden he could ill afford on his tiny wage. To make things worse, Maeve's pregnancy became precarious. The physician's visits were more frequent, but there was nothing Colm could do to ease their uncomfortable living situation. Despite his valiant efforts to find more work and despite his days of searching for more reasonable accommodation, a home in the 5 Points was the best he could do. Colm never forgave himself for what he saw as a mistake in leaving their home country and bringing them further down in society. He had hoped his children might do better, but the circumstances never turned in their favor. Instead, Colm spent his days retelling the stories of his youth in Ireland, of the majestic college he attended, full of literate and clever minds. They were the stories Ailey's thrived on. She had often dreamed of attending a university like her father and becoming someone others would admire. It was a fantasy that had brought her much joy in her youth as her father taught her all that he knew. Schooling was an expense he could ill afford, but that did not mean that she and her sister were doomed to a life of ignorance. Colm saw to their education personally with Maeve's assistance. He taught them the classics and all he knew of math, economy, philosophy, and literature. He made them spend hours reading every day from the time they were able to understand letters. The library of books which he had brought with him was their library, and there was no greater collection of work in all of 5 Points. Her father had hoped that perhaps he could tutor others, but in the slums, being able to read paid far less than working in the streets and the factories. Her father never allowed her to share the thinking of those around her. Every day, Ailey's learned something new. Every day, she dreamed of more, for herself, for Marin, and for her parents. They were dreams she had hoped to accomplish, but her parents' deaths had seen an end to her initial plans and an alternate dream had to be found. Ailey's opened her eyes to a dark sky filled with stars so brilliant they made her wish that she could pluck one from the heavens and save it in her pocket. This was a journey she'd remember for a lifetime, the alternate road of salvation that God had brought to her. This was a moment in time she would never get back. It was the leap of faith that would mark the greatest change in their lives. She turned to her sister, who was still fast asleep beside her. She brushed the hair from Maren's face and wished that she would never have to deal with the difficult things Elise had. Elise had spared her sister the discomfort of going to bed on an empty stomach or seeing their father stumbling with too much drink over the despair of shattered dreams. She had always ensured that Maren was protected. She always would. The stagecoach had arrived on time, but there was no one there to greet them. Elise stood on the platform of the Hidden Creek Depot, the last stop in their long journey to a better life. She was as fatigued as was Maren, who was complaining about stiffness in her back. Though the scenery had been breathtaking, the length of the trip left both her and Maren feeling battered. And now, having arrived to find that those who had sent for them and orchestrated their passage were not there for their arrival, was off-putting, and Elise's Irish ire was kindled. Where can they be? Maren asked as she looked around, her single bag clutched in both hands before her. I don't know. They were supposed to be here, Elise answered as she tried to conceal her concern and annoyance. Had they confused the days? It was a long trip, perhaps they had simply mistook Thursday for Friday? It was possible. Elise refused to believe that they would be so impolite as to expect them to find their own way to Clover Farm, the small homestead several miles outside of town. I'm hungry, Maren commented in response to the audible rumble of her belly. So am I, but we've used all our food, Elise answered. We used all we bought in Tinsdale, and I haven't any more money. You'll just have to wait until after you're wed. What? I must be wed before I eat again, cried Maren, alarmed. You know what I mean, Elise responded. I'm sure we'll be cared for before the weddings take place. If only their grooms would make an appearance. They better get here soon, Maren complained. Go sit over there, Elise instructed, nodding her head toward the small bench that rested against the wooden wall of the depot. I'll look around. And leave me here? Maren responded with slight alarm. You're a big girl, Mary, you can sit on your own for a little while. I won't be long. I'm just going to try to locate the men. Perhaps I can get a message to them. Hurry back, Maren replied as her eyes shifted to the numerous faces that had taken interest in the town's new arrivals. Elise had noticed, too, but she was made of sterner stuff than to be unsettled by a little ogling. They were strangers in a small town, so they were bound to be noticed. John had said there were only 50 families, which wasn't a lot, and most of them were men who had come out to stake their claims and build something for themselves. 2 women arriving alone would surely be more than enough to get eyes staring and tongues wagging. Elise turned back to her sister for a moment. Please, hold my bag. She dropped the article into her sister's lap and then headed toward the ticket office. Someone there would surely be able to help them. The Rogers brothers, the lanky gentleman who operated the ticket office, replied in surprise. That's what I said. Do you know them? Elise questioned. Know them, he repeated. You mean knew them? Elise's heart stopped. What do you mean by knew? I mean John Rogers died 2 weeks ago. A fever took him. Was real quick. No one saw it coming, not even his brother Ned. And that poor man was so grief-stricken that he sold the farm and moved south only days after we put John in the ground. I think I heard he'd moved to Bledmington. He looked at her curiously. Why you a skin anyway? You ain't no relation, are you? Elise couldn't speak. Her mind was in a fog. John couldn't be dead. Ned couldn't have left. What about her and Maren? Had he forgotten them so easily? Had Ned also forgotten the promise he made her sister to love and care for her? Had he forgotten that they'd given up all they had to come and start over as wives? Tears stung her eyes, but Elise refused to shed them as she balled her small hands into fists and squeezed as hard as she could. Wait, are you one of them ladies they was expecting? Them women from New York, the clerk questioned curiously. And if I am? Elise retorted, more rudely than she'd intended. Now see here, missy. Around here we speak more kindly to one another than you people do in your big city, the man replied with some temper. Now watch your tongue, or leave my office. The scolding had done its work. Elise wasn't usually so emotional. She was ashamed and more than a little unsettled by the stark turn of events. It wasn't the clerk's fault they were in such a predicament. Did he control death? Lord, what are we to do? I'm sorry. She began but decided that her thoughts were better off unsaid. I do apologize for my rudeness. It was unfair of me. We knew you was coming. I'm real sorry about how things turned out. She nodded and turned on her heel, her mind still reeling as she tried to conceive a way to break the horrible news to Marin. Her sister would be devastated. She'd placed all her hopes on Ned's supposed love for her and on a future that was not going to be. Elise was less troubled. Though she was sorry to hear of John's death, for he had seemed a kind man in his letters, it did not grieve her. She liked him well enough to marry him, but her primary goal in the arrangement was to ensure Marin's future, not her own. She could make her way if she had to. Marin could not. Don't you want your letter? The clerk called after her, causing Elise to almost trip over her own feet as she turned in wide-eyed surprise. What letter? The one Ned left for ya. Chapter 3. Marin hadn't stopped crying for one moment since Elise had delivered the shocking news. Her disappointment was acute, and Elise had to stop her when she began to blame her own words, spoken in jest on the train, for the tragedy that had befallen them. Thankfully, Mr. Quinn, the clerk at the depot, had been more than accommodating to them once he understood their plight. He had even closed the ticket office early in order to escort them to Reverend Dixon's home on the edge of town. It had been a solemn ride as Elise held her sister and allowed her to mourn while she carried the burden of their future for the both of them. Weeping wasn't something afforded to the strong, only a release for the weak. Elise had never allowed herself the privilege. It was clear that life would show her no favors, despite her efforts, and she hoped her strength would take her through this ordeal as well. The people of faith in the Bible had gone through worse and endured. She could do the same. Who do we have here, Stanley? The Reverend questioned when he opened the door to meet them. This here is Miss Elise and Miss Marin Keith. They was to marry John and Ned. The Reverend's face fell. Oh, he spoke gently as he took in their faces and travel-worn appearance. Which of you was to marry John? He questioned. I was, Elise answered. My condolences to you, miss. I performed the funeral rites for John myself. He was a good, honest man with a big heart. Poor Ned simply didn't know what to do without him. He'd followed in his brother's shadow his entire life. He was a nothing without him. Beside her, Marin sucked in a pained breath. Elise tried to soothe her with a heartfelt rub on her back. That is certainly clear, revered, and I would ask you not to speak extensively of it. The pain is too near for my sister, and her distress is my own, Elise replied. She had not forgiven the young man for the grief which saw him abandon her sister to chance, just as their mother had done. You better come inside, Reverend Dixon replied as he looked at her curiously. I'll ask my wife Mildred to make us some tea. Elise entered the neat home with Marin close behind her. Have a seat, the Reverend offered. Her sister looked at her for direction, and when Elise took a seat, so did she. There must have been a reason why Ned had given them instruction to seek Reverend Dixon upon their arrival, and she would soon know it. It was clear Ned's mind, grief-stricken as it was, had not been completely void of thought for them. He'd known he was going to be gone when they arrived and he'd left someone there who could help them, but what help could he give? Could he set them up with a home and husbands? Could he pay their way back to a city where they had nothing? Elise needed to know. Ned told you about us? She asked immediately, her eyes trained on the godly man's face. Indeed, he answered with a nod of his head. As the only clergyman for 100 miles, he and his brother had come to me to see about the wedding rites. What are we to do? She asked flatly. We left everything we had in New York. We have nothing but the bags we came with, and now we have no husbands to care for us, she admitted. Have you lodging? He questioned. None. John had made all the preparations for us. The wedding was to be today. There was no need for us to seek accommodation other than with our husbands, she answered. It was a fact that Elise hated. She was used to taking care of everything herself, but preparing a place for her and her sister in a town as far away as Hidden Creek had been virtually impossible on her own. She'd had to trust John to take care of all she couldn't. There were no other options. So that was what she'd done, and now she was regretting it. Have you money to pay for lodging? The Reverend questioned further. She shook her head. I spent our last on food on the way here. Marin sniffled. I'd be willing to work for lodging, Elise added quickly. She did not want the Reverend to think she was trying to leech off the kindness of a stranger. She would happily work to make her way. She had all her life. So would I, Marin interjected as she quickly wiped her tear-streaked cheeks. I'll work. Despite the sincerity of her sister's offer, it only made Elise frustrated. She gave her sister a solemn look. Marin had no idea what work may be required of them. Her hands had only ever held a needle and thread to pay for their meat. Elise had toiled in factories and cleaned floors. She was better equipped. Unfortunately, I have no lodging to offer you. Mildred and I have a small home that only affords us enough for ourselves. The same as what you would find in most homes in Hidden Creek, the Reverend explained. However, there may be a place outside of town which could accommodate you. As you say you are willing to work for your keep, there is a possibility some arrangements could be made. Hope leaped into Elise's heart and a sigh of relief left Marin. You understand, of course, that I'd have to speak to the owner first, Reverend Dixon added cautiously. Of course, Reverend. We appreciate anything you could do to help us, Elise answered. We understand the precariousness of our circumstances and are by no means above accepting aid where it can be found. Reverend Dixon glanced out the window thoughtfully. Well, there is no better time than the present for this sort of thing, I suppose, he said with a sigh. Evening will be coming soon and with it, your need for a safe place to sleep. The faster we secure a place for your lodging the better. Stanley, we'll be taking your cart if you'd oblige. My buggy's with Simeon for repairs. How's he doing? Stanley questioned. Haven't seen him much since that wife of his got herself pregnant. There was something in the way he spoke that stirred up a sense of dislike in Elise. What a thing to have said about a man's wife, the insinuation in his words clear even to her who was a stranger in their town. He's doing quite well. He's a great support for Hialeah, Reverend Dixon added with a note of disapproval. I am praying the child will be a boy. Every man wants his first child to be a son. Hialeah, an interesting name, Elise thought as she listened to the two men's discourse. It wasn't a common name, that was for sure, but neither was hers or Marin's, at least not in this country. Stanley scoffed. I had 6 girls, a lot of good praying did me. Reverend Dixon smirked. Girls cost less to feed and can make their own clothes to save on money, Elise interjected, a little insulted by Stanley's response to having daughters, though she was sure it wasn't an unusual one. He shot her an annoyed look. A very good point, Miss Keefe, the Reverend replied with some approval. I was going to say that every child is a gift from God, but you have put it even better, and in more practical terms to my spiritual ones. Stanley grunted dismissively. Where we be heading? He questioned as he got to his feet and started for the door. Going so soon? Mildred's voice called from behind them as all parties present prepared to leave. A tray of tea and cakes was in her hand as she watched them. I'm sorry to have troubled you, my dear, but indeed we must be leaving now. I need to find these 2 young ladies a place to sleep, he informed her. I won't be long, he added and planted a tender kiss on his wife's cheek. Where are we headed? Stanley repeated a little less graciously, his gruff voice shattering the sweetness Elise found in the Reverend's gesture to his wife. The Barber Ranch. I want to have a word with Hamilton. Hamilton? Stanley scoffed. That old sourpuss? You'd have better luck getting them a place to sleep on the floor at the depot than you would with him. That may be true, but since the depot was not made for accommodating lodgers, I say Hamilton is as good an idea as any. Besides, who do you know with rooms to spare and no one to fill them? Revered Dixon replied. There's a reason Hamilton's is empty. Any man who can run off his own brothers is a man to avoid, Stanley challenged. What's he talking about? Elise interjected with some concern. She didn't want her sister under the roof of some strange man who evidently was a walking human repellent. I apologize for Stanley's forthrightness. Sometimes he doesn't know when enough is enough, Reverend Dixon answered and gave the man in question a censuring look. I like someone who believes in plain facts instead of flowery rhetoric, Elise answered. Now, tell me, who is this man? Hamilton Barber is the eldest of the 3 Barber brothers. The youngest, Simeon Barber, you heard us mention earlier. He has a small homestead west of town, but he operates a smithy nearby. He married 5 years ago, and his wife's expecting. The middle brother, James, lives on a homestead not far from Simeon's. He's got a lovely wife and twin daughters. Miriam and Elizabeth, Mildred added with a smile. They're so sweet. Just a year old and already they're charming the hearts of everyone they meet. They certainly are, the Reverend continued, momentarily turning his attention to his wife. Once, the brothers lived together, but family tensions have put a strain on their relationships. They have barely spoken since the younger siblings wed, he continued, once again returning his gaze to her. Why? Elise asked abruptly. A sigh answered her. Hamilton is a man who was never taught to compromise. He's fixed in his beliefs and absolutely unwavering. Not even I have been able to sway him on some keen points of spiritual significance. So he believes in God? She continued to question. Oh, indeed. He is most devout, but I'm afraid his father taught him a rather skewed view of God's word and how it should be applied. I have spent many years trying to remedy that with no success. He's a bigot, Stanley spat. Stanley, that is not a fair thing to say, the Reverend countered. He needs help, just like any other man, and like most, he isn't even aware of it. He picked up his hat. Shall we go? Elise wanted to say no, that there was absolutely no way that she nor her sister would take the hospitality of so seemingly odious a man, but she did not. There were no other options, but at least she had this comfort. Perhaps Hamilton Barber would simply refuse them if he were so disagreeable, and then help could come from some other quarter of the town. She'd pray for it. Chapter 4. Reverend Dixon had lost his mind, or at the least been kicked in the head by that ornery horse he insisted on riding. There was no way that he could be standing in his home asking him to take in 2 strange women, the likes of which he had never seen from a place he knew nothing of, nor did he want to know. New York was beyond Hamilton's simple interests. His affairs went as far as Texas and no further. Besides, they could be thieves, pretty thieves, but thieves nonetheless. What did the Reverend even know about them? Nothing, except what a dead man and a runaway husband had told him, all of which spoke volumes to his mind. Absolutely not, Reverend, Hamilton answered gruffly. I'm as sorry as any man for the young lady's plight, but to have them lodge in my home is simply out of the question. He stood decisively and strode toward the door to usher his unexpected guests out. Hamilton, be reasonable. Where else can they go? Reverend Dixon replied undeterred. What does the Bible tell us of those in need? Halfway to the door, Hamilton bristled and stopped. Using the word of God against him wasn't a fair fight. He loved the Bible and tried his best to live by its precepts. He gritted his teeth. You're the Reverend. You know better than me what it says, Hamilton answered in mock politeness. It says in the book of Isaiah that we are to feed the hungry, give shelter to the poor in our own homes, and clothe them, the Reverend instructed as he stepped closer. Can you think of a more befitting description of the verse than the plight of these 2 young women? I certainly cannot. Hamilton felt small, the way he did whenever his father scolded him. Even at his age, he could still feel his father's censure and hear his voice reverberating in his 40-year-old ears. Ulysses Barber had been a hard man, forged by a hard life of toil. He had instilled the same fortitude which had gotten him through years of desperation, into a son who was too young to understand that he was not yet the man his father was making him into. He would never be that man in the older Barber's eyes, though Hamilton had done every conceivable thing he had ever been asked. Even after his father's death, Hamilton Barber was still answering to him. "Reverend," he began but was stopped short. "What would you dear mother think?" Warmth flooded the back of Hamilton's neck at the mention of his mother. While his father was hard, his mother was love. She had tried to shield him, but there was no protection for him. He had long forgiven her for that failing. She had raised his brothers to have bigger hearts than he had, hearts like her own, but he could not be who she wished him to be and still be the man his father expected. He was to be a reflection that Ulysses would approve of long after he was gone. Hamilton had basically succeeded in that, though Hamilton's hand had not become one to strike out as his father's had, and he had sworn an oath to himself not to subject any future sons to the cruel lessons his father had instilled. There would be no abandonment in the woods to harden them and teach them to survive. There would be no flogging to beat obedience into them. There would be no nights of hunger to teach them to appreciate what they'd been given. Hamilton would not do to them what had been done to him. "My mother would never let a person go hungry," Hamilton answered, awakening from the fleeting memories of his childhood. "She never met a person she didn't like. It was her nature." His eyes rose to the Reverend's. "But it isn't mine." "Then, in memory of your mother, a woman I held in high regard, would you do me this favor?" "It is but for a time until proper placement can be found for their lodging, or arrangements can be made for their return to New York," Reverend Dixon insisted. "I'm asking you to show some compassion." The word stung. No one had ever shamed him before company. His muddy eyes rose to look on the two women who sat quietly in the midst of it all. The older one, whose name he chose not to recall, was staring up at him with something akin to contempt. How could he let such a person into his house? It was absurd. Yet, how could he not, when petitioned with the memory of his late mother and the specific wish of the Reverend? What would God think if Hamilton refused him? Just until better arrangements can be made, Hamilton finally conceded, his decision made once he considered what the Lord would think of his stance on the matter. "Wonderful," Reverend Dixon exclaimed. "Of course this will mean you'll be sleeping in the cabin. After all, it would be unseemly for two young women to be housed alone with you, a single man." What? There had been no mention of him forfeiting his house to be domiciled in the cabin he had reserved for his brother Simeon's return. It was a hope he'd held for some time, though he doubted that it would happen now that his Indian wife was with child. He held no such hope for James. Hamilton had heard the news of his niece's births but had not seen them except in passing. He kept to the homestead and himself as much as possible. He no longer even ventured into town for the customary dances that had once delighted him or the prospects of the women who could be found there. He was better off alone, though the desires of his heart for love and family contradicted his actions. "This is my house. You can't put me out of my own house," he challenged. "He's right." The voice which spoke was to the ear as vanilla was to the senses, sweet and warm. It took Hamilton by surprise, for he would never have expected such tones to come from such a haughty-looking creature. The young woman, who had watched him with such steady regard and whose large brown eyes reflected all she felt, had kept her tongue until that moment, but now apparently, she could hold it silent no longer. "I beg your pardon?" Hamilton questioned. "I said," Ailes reiterated as she stood, "it isn't right for you to be cast out of your good home. The goodly Reverend is begging hospitality for me and my sister, but I would not have him further inconvenience you or your kindness." Hamilton's ear did not miss the sarcasm in the remark. "If it was any inconvenience I would have said so," he answered. "Which you did," she countered. "Perhaps not in those specific words, but with words harsh enough to convey your feelings. My sister and I have never been any man's burden, and I would not have us start now as yours." "Ailes?" the younger woman questioned, but a scathing look from her sister silenced her. "Reverend Dixon," Ailes continued, ignoring Hamilton's furious look. "We thank you for your pains, but I'm afraid we can't accept this much generosity," she went on, and again Hamilton was certain of the derision in her statement. "If there was another option, do you think you would be standing in my living room debating this?" Hamilton interjected heatedly. It was one thing to be put to shame by the Reverend, another entirely by a stranger begging for his help. Nevertheless, there must be some other place suitable, where helping two women in need would not seem so arduous a task as it appears to be here, She answered him with a pointed look that set Hamilton's blood boiling. You think giving handouts to strange women is a pastime round here? He snarked. We have our own needs to take care of, and who are you to any of us? Nothing to you, but in my father's eyes, we are more valuable than many sparrows. We are jewels in his crown, she retorted with the dignity of a queen. Hamilton would have mocked her sentiment if he had not recognized from whence it came. The phrase she spoke replayed in his mind, but were uttered in another's voice, one more gentle but just as determined. Words eluded him as he sought a response to the glare that was leveled against him. His mother had often quoted that very verse in Zechariah. She had been a woman filled with the word of God, her favorite verses those of defense of his people. Hamilton, as a child, had never understood her reasons for such fondness, but as a man, he had come to understand. His mother's life had always been under threat in their home, and the verses were all she had to protect herself with. They can stay. The words left his mouth as a whisper that he quickly corrected as he asserted himself. I will stay in the cottage while they are here, but rest assured, their lodging will not be free. If they are eager to work, then work they will. I have much for idle hands to do. He looked at them squarely. There is no room for the lazy on this ranch. Up before the sun and to bed long after it has winked its last. If you don't like it, then you can find some other place. Understood? Fire flashed through the woman's eyes as she stared at him with equal vigor. I understood. Chapter 5. There was no one more insufferable than Hamilton Barber. The conceited man was a tyrant at best and a charlatan at worst. There was nothing that he didn't claim to be able to do. He was a one-man army if you listened to him talk, yet he still saw it fit to burden Ailes and her sister with work fit for a man day in and day out. Feed the pigs. Collect the eggs. Bring in the vegetables. Dig the ditch. Shovel the manure. The list went on and on. Ailes was accustomed to drudgery, the lot had been her life story for many years, but it was Marin that concerned her. She was unaccustomed to labor as hard as this, and often her mistakes brought Hamilton's condemnation. I hate it here, Marin whined one evening as she and Ailes were preparing dinner. Can't we go home? What home would you be speaking of, love? The one with rats the size of cats and roaches as bedfellows? Ailes responded. You forget what New York was like for us. How could I? The stink alone back home could choke you, Marin commented. Here at least you can smell the freshness of the air. There, all you could smell was the rot beneath the streets. Yet you want to leave here to return to the squalor? Ailes questioned. You know I don't, she said pitifully. I just want you to be happy. Me? Ailes countered with false enthusiasm. I'm doing just fine, can't you see? I know you better than you think, her sister answered. Do you now? Ailes questioned as she washed the vegetables before preparing. All right, go ahead and tell me about me. The comment had been made in jest. Very few had ever known Ailes well, and it was not for lack of trying. The young woman wore armor around her at every turn, even from her sister there were places she was careful to keep hidden. Which was why the response that followed caused her to stop and pay attention. You're the most selfless person I know, Marin began. Ever since I was born, you were there for me, looking out for me and protecting me from everyone and everything. You think I didn't know why you liked to take me to Broadway? She said, looking up. You think I didn't know about Da and his drinking? Or the fact that you never ate when we went out, but you always got something for me? You noticed all that? Ailes questioned in disbelief. You taught me to read after Da had lost his way and no longer found interest in his books. I always said you should be a teacher, but you never got the chance. No one ever gave people like us a chance. We were all wrong from the start, weren't we? Protestants in a Catholic society. Irish before the influx. Poor because of it all. Still, you sat every day and told me how great God was, and how he provided what little we had. Only I couldn't see it. All I saw was my big sister playing a part, pretending to be happy when she wasn't, and dreaming of things she never would be. Marin's voice became shrill. Stop it, Ailes demanded. You stop it now. Why? I'm telling the truth, you never would. We had nothing, Elise, and we have even less now. Why is this happening to us? Why is God punishing us? Elise could no longer bear to hear the words. Their truth was painful. She rushed to Marin and pulled her close, hugging her as hard as she could. Quiet now before you get Hamilton's attention, she cautioned. The last thing we need is a man like him looking down on us. We still have to live here. I don't care. How much more pain must we endure? Hush, Elise insisted. And it wasn't a lie. She stroked Marin's hair. I gave a brave face for you, but it is clear now that I am no performer. Still, my belief and my faith are as real and as strong as ever. Trials come but to test our fortitude, she said. We must endure the darkness before the dawn. It's always dark, Marin said and wept. When will the sun rise for us? When will it be our turn? I don't know, love. Only God knows, she whispered. Do you remember Job? Marin nodded. No one ever went through as much as he did, right? Right. And what did he say to his friends when they came to him? Though he slay me, yet will I trust him, Marin recited. And though he slay us, yet will we trust him, Elise affirmed. Things could get worse, Marin. They could. We could be like Job and come to the brink of illness, having our friends visit to tear us apart for the wrong we might have done. But we can never lose two things. What's that? God and each other. The tears rolled down Elise's cheeks before she could stop them, revealing years of pain she had kept hidden, buried as deep as she could. Marin's confession had dug them up. Elise, are you crying? Marin asked as her sister wept harder. I'm sorry I didn't take care of you like I promised. I promised I would make sure you were all right, Elise answered. I will do it, Mary. I will find a place for you. A good home, where you can have all the things I never had. Where you can live in peace. I'll make it happen. I will do all in my power, and pray as hard as I can for you to live in the light. I know, Marin answered. But it won't be the same if you aren't there with me. Then I guess I'll have to try to be there, won't I? Elise laughed weakly as she wiped her cheeks. Marin's hand rose to assist her. I've never seen you cry, Marin whispered. I never wanted you to. I've done some crying. Always at night, when you were asleep, and I was alone. Why would you not tell me? Because our family was a mess, and you needed someone to rely on. Ma wasn't going to do it. She was too busy trying to make a living. Da wasn't going to do it. He was drowning his disappointments in whiskey. You only had me. Who did you have? Her sister questioned. I had God, Elise answered with a deep breath. He's all I've ever had. He kept you going this long, Marin replied. Then he'll keep you even further. Elise smiled at her sister's words, and the hope they gave her. He will. He will do the same for you, too, if you trust him. I'll do my best, Marin answered. Though I don't understand him as you do. That's because you haven't had a chance to yet, but you will. He's always looking for those who are looking for him. How will I know when I find him? You just will, Elise answered. It's that feeling of peace I get sometimes when things are going wrong, and I start talking to him about it. It may just be me, but I believe that's when he's listening. The stillness is his way of saying it will be all right. Stillness, Marin contemplated. Now it's time for you to be getting to bed. We've got to be up early to help Hamilton in the field, she answered. Must we? Marin huffed. Yes. We must pay our way until we can do better. Now get yourself to bed. I'll finish here. Good night, Elise. Good night, Mary. Chapter 6. How did you get here? The voice startled her from the darkness as Elise walked into the front room. Hamilton, she asked as her heart raced within her chest. What do you think you are doing sitting in the dark like that? Were you trying to stop my heart? How did you get here? He repeated as if he hadn't heard a word she said. It was typical really, he was always going on about himself and what he needed. Not once had he ever considered her or her sister. Elise was in no mood for it. "If you don't mind, I'm tired, and we have to be up early to help you in the field," she answered as she attempted to make her way to the stairs. "Be sure to lock up when you leave." He was still staying in the cottage and had been every night since their arrival weeks ago. "Was it hard for you there?" he asked suddenly. Elise's steps faltered. "What? Was your life very difficult for you there?" he reiterated without his customary annoyance. Elise wasn't sure what it was she heard in his voice, something strained and unfamiliar. "Why do you want to know?" she asked suspiciously. "You never cared before. You live in my house and eat my food. I don't think it's too much to ask to know who the people are I'm sharing my life with," he countered. His words struck Elise as odd. They occupied the same homestead, but sharing lives was hardly a description of their circumstances. They were as far from each other as night was from day, and Elise was sure they were all the better for it. Her attempt to avoid him failed miserably, as Hamilton's long legs carried him faster than she could have imagined. One moment he was occupying the chair across the room, the next he was standing in front of her barring her retreat, his features outlined in the lamp she held in her hand. Elise had never truly noticed the size of the man before. He was like an oak tree, thick-limbed and towering. His chestnut hair hung around his shoulders framing a grizzled jaw. His brown eyes were deep pools that frightened her with their ferocity. "What do you want?" she questioned defensively, taking a step back. "Just an answer." "How did I come here?" she repeated his query. "The oppressive dictatorial manner of a corrupt government and society, that's how," she retorted smartly. One who favored the alignment of religion rather than ability and familial connection over dedication. Hamilton looked at her confused. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the society that was in this country when my parents arrived here from Ireland. The society that allowed a man and his expectant wife to suffer, when it was they who brought them there, then left them with nothing to fall back on. A family they never looked back at, and not long after, could only look down on." "I'm sorry." The apology tied Elise's quick tongue in knots. Had her ears deceived her? Had he really expressed sorrow? She searched his face for an answer. "I'm sorry I made things more difficult for you when you arrived. It wasn't fair of me to take my frustrations out on you and your sister. You've been a real help to me since you arrived." She was stunned. An apology and praise? Who was this man that stood before her? It was all unexpected. Why the sudden kindness? What had prompted him to say such generous words now? Then it hit her. Ailey's eyes grew wide as the pieces fell into place. "You were listening?" she challenged, praying she was mistaken but knowing in her heart she was not. Hamilton avoided her eyes. "You were. You were listening in on Marin and me. How could you? How could you invade our privacy like that? How could you just steal what was private and special between siblings?" she questioned fiercely. "You invaded my privacy, remember?" he argued. "You and your sister came into my house and turned my entire life upside down with your incessant chatter. Not to mention your sister's inability to get things right the first time. That's not her fault. She never had to do work like this before, but she's gotten better," Elise defended her. "She has," Hamilton agreed. "When she got here, she was a menace. Leaving the barn open so the milk cow could get out. Forgetting the eggs in the henhouse, or how about when she left the milk outside and it soured, then she tipped it over a few days later and had the porch smelling like old socks. I was ready to turn you both out." "She was more harm than good," he stated, and then a small smirk curled his lips and he chuckled. A laugh? Had Hamilton just laughed? "My lord, you do know how to laugh," Elise stated unintentionally. Hamilton's face immediately became still. "Everyone can laugh." "I didn't think you could. All I ever see you do is scowl." He looked at her seriously. "I don't usually have much to laugh about. There's always work to be done. There's a life to be lived, too," she added. "What's the fun in being alive if you never actually live? What's that supposed to mean?" Is that more of your pretty talk? My pretty talk is philosophy, she stated. My father taught me. My father taught me to hunt, Hamilton replied. All that talk stuff wasn't important out here. Why not? Elise questioned. You had to have learned at least a little in school. My mother taught us our letters and how to read and write. Mostly she used the Bible, but schooling wasn't something that was really important back then. There was work to be done on the land, and the more hands the better, especially if they were hands that were going to benefit from the labor, instead of having to be paid. Elise looked at Hamilton squarely. Have you never read the Iliad? His blank stare told her he had not. Did your mother never read you stories? She asked. Elise realized she was getting personal, but her curiosity was piqued. The only stories she ever told us were the ones she read from the Bible, he answered. That verse of Zechariah you quoted the day you came here? It was one of her favorites. Elise looked at him quizzically. Is that why you let us stay? He nodded. I used to love listening to her read. It was the only comfort in this house. My father wasn't an easy man. Mine drank, Elise admitted. Not at first, though. He lost his way after they took his job from him, and he could no longer provide for his family the way he wanted. He tried to find himself in a bottle. It killed him. He drank himself to death? Hamilton questioned, a strange look on his face, one of almost camaraderie. No, Elise replied. He was murdered. Murdered? Yes. He'd gone to the pub for a drink one evening. They found his body in the back alley the next morning. They never caught anyone, of course. Things like that happen too often in 5 Points. His murder was just another death. It wasn't to you, Hamilton said as he placed a gentle hand on her arm. He was your father. If it were me, I'd want to know who did it. I used to want to know, she admitted. But pursuing that and falling apart over it would do nothing. My mother was broken enough as it was. Her eyes rose to meet his. She killed herself not long afterward. She couldn't live without him. When was this? Hamilton asked, genuine concern in his voice. A year ago, she confessed, though she couldn't explain why she was being so forthcoming with a man who had eavesdropped on her. It was strange, but somehow, she felt better by doing it. So that's how you got here? He asked. Yes, Elise answered with her chin high. I had to protect my sister. It was just Marin and I. If I didn't do it, no one would. Coming here was supposed to be our chance at a new life. It will be, Hamilton answered, his face grave. I promise, I'll help you find a way to make it so. Chapter 7. The sun had been up for hours and still, there was no sign of Marin. Elise had thought her sister had beaten her to their daily chores, but when she reached the coops and found her absent, a foreboding settled in her stomach. Hamilton had left long before she rose to attend an early morning meeting with a prospective buyer a town away. He had stated the previous evening that he would return for lunch, but that was hours away and the sickening feeling in Elise's stomach would not bear the weight. Elise walked the length and breadth of the ranch in search of her sister, but there was no trace of her. All the horses were accounted for and the wagon was tethered in the stable where Hamilton had left it after their last trip to town. Marin had no means of transport save her own legs, and the wooded areas nearby were not safe for a woman alone, or any path in such lonely country. So where had she gone? Elise would have ridden into town, but she feared a horse more than she feared any man. Riding was not meant for someone like her. She felt safer on the ground instead of perched atop something with a mind and will of its own that at any moment could decide that her presence was no longer something it would tolerate. Perhaps Marin had gone for a walk and gotten lost? Perhaps she needed a moment to reflect on all they'd been through. In the past, Marin had on occasion wandered to her favorite places to read or think. Elise raced into the house and to the first floor where she and Marin slept. She searched the stacks near her bed and found, to her dismay, the book her sister had been reading was still there, a small note peeking from between the pages. She picked it up with trembling hands, and she opened the page and retrieved the note. Dear Elise. I've gone. I know you would try to stop me if you could, which is why I will not tell you where I'm going. I heard Hamilton last night. I would not have him turn you out on my account. You have done nothing but good for me my entire life, and I have brought you nothing but toil and misery. I will no longer be the source of your unhappiness, neither will I be the reason you are without a home, such as it is. Please don't try to find me. Please let me do this one thing for you, as you have never let me before. I love you with all my heart, and I will pray that God will bring back all that was stolen from you because of your love for me. Your sister, Mary. Foolish girl. Elise cried as she dropped the book and ran for the door. She didn't know where she was going. There was no logic, only feeling. She raced into the fields and began to shout her sister's name as loud and hard as she could. Marin had to hear her. She had to know that she had been mistaken, that Hamilton was not turning them out, that his sentiments toward them had changed, or at least were beginning to change. Hours passed and still, Elise searched and called for Marin. She was hoarse by the time the silhouette of a rider broke over the hill headed in her direction. Hamilton, she breathed as desperation gave way to the tiniest of hope. He knew the town and the surroundings. He could help her find her sister. He had to. She called to him long before he was close enough to hear her. "What's wrong?" he said urgently as he reined his horse in. The large animal shifted tensely before her, but even that would not dissuade her from her task. "It's Marin, she's gone." "What? Where?" "She must have heard us talking last night. She thought you were turning us out." "Silly girl. I thought it, but I wouldn't have done it. I gave my word to the Reverend that you could stay. She must not have believed you. I think she left after hearing your words," Elise rattled on as her composure broke. "You have to find her. Please." "I'll do anything," she pleaded desperately. "She's all I have in the world. If I lost her, I would be as Job, alone in the world with not a friend to comfort me. I don't know that I could stand it." Her knees met the grass as her legs melted beneath her. The weight of 24 years of hardship crashed against her like a flood that threatened to drown her. Marin was the last person she had in the whole world. The thought of a life without her, a life completely devoid of all love, ripped her heart in two. Had this been what her mother felt before she took her life? Was this what she had suffered and lost to? It was abject loneliness to consider a life of sorrow and misery with no one to walk beside you through it. Her mother had always had her father, while Elise had Marin. Elise? Hamilton's voice broke into the closing darkness of her thoughts. In a fog, she turned to find him at her side, his strong arm holding her up as he cradled her against his chest. "Marin," she mumbled, barely able to speak as her body became heavy under the weight of her thoughts and her fear. What would happen to her sister without her being there to protect her? Horrible images flashed through her mind. They were sights she had witnessed firsthand back home, where the lifeless body of a young woman was found beaten in the street. Elise clapped a hand over her mouth to stop herself from screaming. She didn't notice when her body was lifted, nor did she register as Hamilton cradled her in his arms and placed her upon his saddle before jumping astride behind her and holding her securely to himself. "I'll find her. Let's get you back," he said huskily in her ear. The wind rushed past her, whipping her cinnamon hair about her drawn face. She felt old, much older than her years, as if the life she had endured had finally caught up to her. She leaned back against Hamilton, no longer caring about the propriety of space. All her thoughts were lost somewhere in the fog. The house lay before her and soon she found herself in the front room, but she did not remain there. Hamilton carried her as if she weighed nothing. He took her upstairs and to her bed. He laid her gently upon it, pulling the sheet around her as he looked at her with concern. "You've had a nasty shock," he stated gently. "You need to rest." "How long were you out there looking for her?" Elise shook her head. "All right, don't answer. I don't want to leave you alone, but I have to find your sister. It isn't safe to be wandering about alone, and she is as naive a person as I have ever met. If she were my sister, I'd be beside myself as well." He squeezed her hand and for the first time, Elise felt a glimmer of the hope that her sister would be found and all would be well. She knew she should help look for Marin. She wanted to look for her dear sister, but right then, she was so spent, she could barely move. "I'll find her," Hamilton promised her. "I won't come back without her. I swear it. I'll send the doc to look in on you." "Don't do anything foolish," he warned, and Elise wondered at his thoughts. Did he believe her capable of the same act that her mother had perpetrated against them? "Bring her home," she whispered as tears rolled down her already damp cheeks. "Please, bring my sister home." And for once, she depended on someone else to do something for her. Chapter 8. Days passed and there was no sign of either Marin or Hamilton, and Elise's depression and frantic state worsened the longer they were gone. Doc Parsons had come as Hamilton promised, and with him Reverend Dixon and his wife, all eager to hear the news and to offer prayer, but Elise couldn't find the energy to join them. She hadn't gotten out of bed, and she had eaten hardly anything during that time. She was tired and weak and so discouraged that all looked lost. Her mind was filled with accusation. Her thoughts grew twisted and Elise could remember nothing that she'd ever done right. She'd failed to hide the truth from Marin as a child. She couldn't be the support her mother needed after her father was gone. She had failed to keep the likes of Rob Clary from being interested in her sister. Why, that devilish man would have turned her sister into one of his ladies of the night if she hadn't tried to marry them off. Then there were their engagements and the mess that had met them upon their arrival in Hidden Creek, and now the circumstances they found themselves in. It was all her fault. All of it. Perhaps Marin was better off without her. Perhaps the world was better off without her. The sly thoughts crept into her already fragile mind like a serpent through tall grass. "No," she muttered to herself as she clutched her pillow tightly. She couldn't think like that. She wouldn't. End it. The thought jerked her from her stupor, as the terrifying reality of her own contemplations finally registered. "Job's wife said to curse God and die," she whispered shakily. She was never heard of again, but Job was rewarded 100-fold what he'd lost. 100-fold. She continued to tremble. "I can hold on." A knock at the door only startled her further as the vague image of her mind's apparition flashed before her eyes. "Elise?" A woman's voice called from the other side of the door. It was Gwendolyn, the wife of Hamilton's brother, James. "Come in." The other woman walked in with a tray in her hands and a smile on her face. The chatter of the lower floor filtered in through the door as she stepped inside. Gwenny, as she liked to be called, had become a constant presence in recent days, along with her daughters and Simeon's wife Hialeah, as concern for Hamilton and Marin grew. Just 2 days before, Simeon and James had gone off to find and help their brother, leaving their families under one roof for safety and consolation. "How are you today?" Gwenny asked as she set the tray on the table beside her and took a seat in the chair. She looked on Elise with such kindness, though Elise could hardly say she deserved it. "I don't know," she admitted. "I feel as if I've been asleep for a long time." "You have," Gwen answered. "I've never seen someone sleep so much, except my father in the days before he passed." "I'm sorry," Elise replied. "My father's dead, too. And my mother." Gwen's smile was consoling. "Mine as well. Looks like we have more in common than I imagined." "I know it must be hard to lose the ones you love," Gwen continued. "When I lost my father, the last person I had, I didn't know what to do, but I had my consolation." "Your consolation?" "James," Gwen answered with a smile. "Before my father died, he begged me to look for a man who would love me for me. James found me, from miles away, he found me and loved me, and despite the difficulties when I got here, we found a happiness neither one of us has ever imagined. I have 2 daughters now as witness to it." She chuckled. "My sister is all I have," Elise stated. "There was no James waiting for me." "Did you love John?" Gwen asked. It was the first time anyone had ever questioned her attachment to her late fiancé. Elise wasn't sure how to answer, but finally, the truth slipped from her tongue with relief. "No. I was marrying him for Marin." "For your sister?" Gwen asked, clearly confused. "His brother Ned had asked for my sister's hand, but I wanted to be sure he'd take care of her, so when John asked me as well, I said yes. Elise, that's not a reason to marry, Gwen chided gently. You should marry for love. I was going to marry for the love of my sister, to make sure she had everything I wish someone had given me. And what about you? Gwen asked as she laid a kind hand upon hers. What about love for yourself? Elise could feel the furrow in her brow as she considered Gwen's words. Love for herself? She had never seen it as an option. You've never thought of it, have you? Not really, Elise admitted. It's always been about Maren to me. Gwen sighed. I may be out of my mind to say this, and even more so out of my place, but Elise, I couldn't consider myself any sort of woman if I didn't tell you that you can't build your life on caring for other people. You need love and care too, and I think it's time you opened your eyes up to the possibilities. What possibilities? There's no one. Gwen's face tightened as she bit her lip, her eyes shifting from her own. There is someone, she said finally. Though I can't believe I'm thinking it. What are you talking about? Elise questioned her. Not now, Gwen answered. You need your strength. Do you feel up to eating today? She changed the subject, but Elise was not so easily swayed. Who? She asked again, taking hold of Gwen's hand. The other woman looked at her in surprise. I'll make you a deal. You eat everything I brought, and I mean everything, then I'll tell you. Agreed? She held out her hand toward Elise, awaiting her confirmation. Agreed, Elise stated as she took the offered hand and shook it. She smiled. You're a very interesting woman, Gwen Barber. You'd be right, the other woman answered with a laugh. I take that as a compliment. What else could it be? Elise replied as she allowed Gwen to place the tray on her lap. Hamilton had plenty to say about me when I arrived, Gwen stated. All of it wrong, I bet, Elise answered as she took a sip of her soup. Actually, Gwen said thoughtfully, he was right, at least on some accounts. Her response came as a surprise. I can see you find that hard to believe, Gwen continued. But I assure you, it's true. He thought I was too wild for James, and at the time, I was, but James brought a peace to my life that I needed while I brought a fire to his. Hamilton was only partly right. He has such strong opinions about everything, Elise continued as she once again sipped the rich broth. Unbidden images of Hamilton's face came to her mind, and she found herself almost smiling at the image. From what James tells me, it isn't entirely his fault. Their father beat it into him. He had no choice but to be what the man wanted, and then he criticized him for it. The responsibility for his brothers fell on his shoulders, and that was a lot for a young man on his own with an entire ranch depending on him. I never thought about it like that. Nor did I realize that he carried so much responsibility, Elise said, her spoon hovering before her as she stared at Gwen. Something stirred in Elise's heart. Hamilton's story was very like her own. Gwen smiled. I wanted to hate Hamilton, but then I realized he didn't mean any harm. All he did, including the bad, was because he loved his brothers and wanted nothing but the best for them. Gwen sighed sadly. The problem with Hamilton is that he thought his age made him no better than they did what was right for them. Elise couldn't help but think again how she and Hamilton had a lot in common. He had clung to his brothers and tried to do right by them. She had done the same with Maren. His opinions have left him lonely, even though his brothers would love him if he'd accept them, Gwen added. Do you think he could ever be happy? Elise found herself asking as she rested her spoon on the tray. I believe he can. He just needs a little help getting there. Elise ate the rest of her meal in silence, with Gwen's words rolling over in her mind. When she was finished eating, she didn't bother to ask her who she'd met earlier, her mind was already too full. Elise, Gwen said as she slipped from the room. Open your eyes, you might see something you didn't expect. What do you mean? She questioned as fatigue began to make her eyelids heavy. Hamilton promised to bring your sister home, Gwen stated. James said he never makes promises to anyone outside those he cares about. What are you saying? I'm saying, look and see. Chapter 9. How had this happened? How had two women come to mean enough to him that he'd made a promise to one and left all he owned to find the other? It made no sense to him, even as he rode for miles in pursuit of Marin's whereabouts. The young woman had been wise, much wiser than he'd given her credit for prior to the incident. She'd covered her tracks well, hitching a ride with a beet supplier headed out of town, and from there with a traveling medicine man who claimed he had the cure for anything that ailed. The trail had grown cold after that, and for 5 days Hamilton wasn't sure he was headed in the right direction, but something inside him insisted he keep going north. A week went by and still nothing. Finally, Hamilton heard something in a market in Wyoming of a pretty brown-haired girl that had joined a traveling show a few days before. What else was said of her he did not care to hear, but the way she was described, he was sure it was Marin and she was on her way to Montana. A few days and he would catch them and bring her home, he thought, but the reality of it had been less than simple. He'd learned that the traveling show was owned by ruffians as word of their misdeeds began to spread. They were swindlers and worse, and the women who worked for them did so under duress. The news made Hamilton's pursuit of Marin even more urgent. What if some ill befell her? What would he tell Elise? How would she take the news if another tragedy occurred in her life? The image of her sallow face as she fell to the ground before him was a memory that would not leave his mind, nor would the way she had barely been able to muster her sister's name that final time. He prayed she was well and that Doc Parsons had tended to her as he wished, but right now her sister was his main focus. Hidden amongst the trees that lined the area where the traveling show made camp, Hamilton watched for signs of Marin. There were a number of men about, some burly and tattooed, obviously former seamen, maybe even men who had seen battle. Retrieving the missing Marin could prove more difficult than he imagined. But first, he had to find her. His eyes scanned the faces of all who moved, and Hamilton began to circle trees in hopes of any indication of where she was being kept. Several minutes passed without sight of her until finally a glimmer. It was too dark to see the color of her hair, but the thickness of the braid in her familiar form was evidence enough that she was here. She had emerged from a tent with a large man behind her. He shoved her forward and Hamilton's hands balled into fists instinctively and his body lurched forward to defend. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on his shoulder pulling him back, and in reflex, Hamilton turned swinging. "Watch it now," Simeon stated as he stepped back from his brother's fist. "Simeon?" Hamilton replied in surprise as recognition hit him and he realized his youngest sibling was not alone. "James? What are you two doing here?" "We came to find you," James replied as he stepped toward him. "You had the entire family worried sick when you didn't reply after a few days. We left the women together to come look for you," Simeon added. "What do you mean together?" Hamilton's eyes grew wide. "Are you saying your wives and children are in my house?" James smirked. "Every one of them." "Elise, how is she?" he asked quickly. The fact that his house was overrun was overshadowed by the opportunity to learn about her health. The answer he received was not one he liked. "When we last saw her, she was doing poorly. Gwen tried, but no matter what she brought Elise to eat, she wouldn't take food." James shook his head. "I don't know what she'll be like by the time we get back, but I can say that I don't think she'll be there if we don't hurry and get her sister back to her." "Don't say that," Hamilton said quickly, though his brother's sentiments were his own fears. "She'll be fine." "I don't know," Simeon added. "I was worried myself." "You don't know her." "Elise will be fine. She wouldn't do anything stupid," he began, but the story of her mother's demise and the look on Elise's face after she'd lost Marin would suggest contrary to what he believed. He wanted to say she wouldn't, but the truth was he wasn't sure, and the fact of it bothered him, tore at him from the inside. He wanted her to be stronger. He wanted her to be a woman to survive the worst. He simply didn't know if she could. "Then let's get her sister back to her," he said finally, taking a deep breath to compose himself. "I promised her, and I won't stop until I've kept my word." "We heard," Simeon answered. "That's why we're here." Hamilton stared at him in the semi-darkness. "If our big brother is making promises, then there is something to this Elise that we want to know about." "Why should that make a difference?" Hamilton questioned. Because, the only people we've ever heard you make a promise to is us, Simeon added as he stepped past his brother to investigate the camp. And if you didn't know, James began, we're the only ones you care about. He turned from Hamilton to Simeon. How many are there? It's been a while since I've found myself in a fight. Hamilton focused again on the task at hand. There are about 10 of them, he stated. I've been following them a while. 1 or 2 can handle themselves, but I think the rest could be scared off easily with a show of strength, he stated. Or steal. Guns? James questioned. If we need them, but I'd rather hope not to have to. Marin's in there, and I don't want her harmed. Don't worry, Simeon stated as he clapped a hand on his brother's shoulder. We're here to help you. So let's do this, James insisted, I need to get home to my family. You aren't the only one, Simeon answered. Would you two stop with all the family talk and just help me? I can't go home if I don't bring Marin back. I couldn't face Elise. I'll distract the ones on the left, Simone offered. The right is mine, James added. Let's try to do this without fists, Hamilton asserted. If we go quietly, we should be able to get away with her. James cleared his throat. Our families would never understand it if we didn't come home. You'll both be going home. I promise you that. There you go again, making promises, James said with a smile. I really think you should consider the significance of that. Would you cut the talk, and say what you mean? Hamilton snapped, growing impatient. All right then, his brother stated as he stepped toward them. You care about that woman Elise, whether you realize it or not, and none of us would be here if you didn't. It's true, Simeon confirmed. The only reason I came is because the Reverend said you told him you'd made Elise a promise. I knew then that your heart had finally welcomed someone else besides us. Hamilton remained silent. It doesn't matter, he said finally. The only thing I want is to bring Elise's sister home to her. Now, let's do this. Chapter 10. Marin was home. She was quieter than usual and more sullen. Bits and pieces of her experience had fallen from her lips, but not enough. Elise didn't push her. She knew that in time, all would be revealed. James and Simeon had gone on and on about how Hamilton had risked his life snatching her to safety. Hamilton tried more than once to shut them up, but they wouldn't do it. It seemed as if they wanted to make sure Elise understood the risks Hamilton had taken. Elise could not stop thanking him. He'd become her hero. Never before had she been able to count on someone and have them truly come through for her. It didn't matter how many times Elise looked at Marin, she didn't think she could ever express how grateful she was to have her sister home. She was sure Hamilton had grown tired of her thanks after the first week of his return. I thought I'd find you here, he suddenly appeared behind the crown of the hill that overlooked the ranch. Did you? She questioned, looking up from where she sat in the thick grass. Why? He looked at her strangely, a smile spreading across his face. Elise didn't know how it was possible, but the sight of him had grown better as the days had passed. He was handsome to her now, when once he had been nothing but cold and foreboding. Perhaps it was the debt she owed him for bringing Marin home, or perhaps it was the question that still lingered in her mind from her conversation with Gwen. She wasn't sure which, but whatever the reason, he had changed, and she found that she liked this Hamilton barber much better than the first. Your sister told me that a place had been found for you in town, a place where you both could live on your own, free of anyone else's tyranny, he said, and she saw the humor in his eyes. There are no tyrants here, she answered as she patted the grass beside her. The last went on a trip and never came back. He never will, Hamilton confirmed as he took his place beside her. Do you believe that? She questioned seriously. His answer was important, more important than he knew. He is never coming back, Elise. I promise. Another promise. It was now or never. She had to ask the question she'd been thinking about every moment of every day since he'd come home. Do you care for me, Hamilton? I do, he answered sincerely. She smiled, her heart light at the fact that he had been able to admit his feelings for her despite the trouble she and her sister had caused. Do you really? She repeated. I must know. It's very important. I said I do, Elise, and I do. I didn't think you were capable of it. Neither did I, but it happened all the same, he answered. You happened. What did I do? She questioned. I never said anything or did anything to make you care for me. I saw something in you that gave me hope, he admitted. Every day I watched you with Marin, listened to you when you didn't know I was there. I thought I'd find something that would justify me expelling you from my home, but my efforts took a turn, and instead, I found more and more reasons why you should stay. I don't understand. I listened to you reading the Bible to her, encouraging her the way my mother had tried to encourage me. You did what my mother had tried to do but what my father never allowed. You let me see there was hope in God, not just provision and wrath, but love and compassion. He laughed ruefully. The very things the Reverend asked from me. Hamilton? Let me finish, he insisted. I have to say this while I have the courage. Once you leave, there will be no more opportunity for me. Opportunity for what? Elise pressed. She needed to know everything he was hiding. She had to know if Gwen had been right and that her weeks of mental turmoil had been justified. Fine. I'll just say it, Hamilton began, nervously folding and unfolding his hands. I care for you, Elise. My brothers seem to think it goes deeper than that, he admitted, but I don't know if it's true. How can you know you feel something if you've never felt it before? She couldn't answer. There were many feelings she'd never experienced, and the one she was feeling right then was one of them. It felt as if Hamilton and she were one, that they understood something of each other that others could not. How do you feel about what I've said? Hamilton questioned, his brown eyes burning into hers. I feel honored, she answered. I know caring for another doesn't come easily for you. Gwen told me about your father. I was horrid with James, he whispered as his eyes fell from hers in embarrassment. Don't, she insisted as she raised her hand to tenderly touch his face. Don't be ashamed. Your past is over. So is mine. Crazy thoughts are in my head. Thoughts I'd considered, but never wanted to act on, despite everything I did to appear cold-hearted. She stared at him, unsure how to respond. You make me want more, he continued as he took her hand from his face and squeezed it gently. You make me think that more is possible, even for me. That someone could care for me as much as I care for those I love. I never had that. It was never for me. Hamilton, you and I are so alike, Elise answered with tears in her eyes. I never thought I would find someone. I believed I could live my life through Marin, and when she left, it was as if I had lost my entire world. It was horrible. Having a life so grounded in another, never considering my own heart and feelings, it's exhausting. The sight of Hamilton's tears stole her breath and her words. Yes, he struggled to say. There was no thought to the action that followed, no plan in her mind to do what she did, but suddenly Elise was cradling him in her arms, a desire to be with him and only him growing in her heart. It hasn't been easy for you, she stated gently. Nor me. We have both been walking in a world where we were the least important to ourselves. Her voice was soft as her own tears began to sting her eyes. I never thought someone could understand, he whispered. Not really. It was hard for me to protect my sister from life, Elise answered. I can't begin to think what it must have been like for you, to see yourself becoming more of the man your father was. Everything I did only seemed to make me become more like him, Hamilton answered, clutching her arm. I did what I thought was best, he continued, but the only thing I did was push my brothers away. They're here now, Elise answered. The breach has been mended. They've been here every day since you returned. Because of you, Hamilton stated as he looked into her eyes. They came for me because I cared for you. No, Elise answered. They came for you because they love you. They would have come for you even if there had been no promise. But there was. I made a promise to you then, and I'd do it again. Oh, Hamilton, she whispered. Elise watched him carefully. She had never seen a man open up in such a way. Her father had let his buried feelings consume him, never been able to say the honest words he hid from her mother, nor his admission of his guilty conscience. "Marry me," Hamilton said fervently. "Stay here with Marin and be my wife." Elise let out a small gasp. "Marry me," he repeated. "Spend the rest of your days trying to find out what this feeling is and who we really are. Say you'll be there for me, and you'll let me be there for you." Elise nodded as an unfamiliar surge of joy raced through her. "Reverend Dixon," Hamilton shouted. "What?" Elise questioned as the Reverend appeared from behind them. "I didn't want to take the chance that you'd change your mind, so I asked the Reverend to be here just in case you said yes." She couldn't believe it. Hamilton had planned this. He'd planned this all out, planned to make her his own. It may have been a small thing to some, but for her, it was more than anyone had ever done. They stood before the Reverend as Marin and all of Hamilton's family appeared along with him. She looked at the man beside her for answers. "Witnesses," he said with a smile as he took her hand. Their ceremony was short, with no flowery rhetoric, but the sentiment of two weary people who had found a connection in the other and a hope in God to mend their wounded hearts. Elise recited her vows, and for the first time in her life, she was not relying only on herself and God, but the promise of a man who was like her in so many ways. The Lord would lead them together, one day at a time, and though there might be struggles, Elise knew in her heart that she'd rather struggle with Hamilton than without him. She had never been kissed, but as her new husband's lips met hers, Elise knew she wanted to be kissed by him forever. It was awkward yet sweet as they stood before all the people they cared about and shared their first moment of intimacy. There was a sweetness to the fact, an innocence she could not describe. It was as if God wanted the ones they loved to bear witness to the story he was going to unfold with them in time to come. This was their new beginning, and God would grant them all that had been stolen. Elise looked around at all those who stood with them. Her family had just increased sixfold. She was blessed beyond belief. Hamilton looked down at her and smiled. And then he, too, gazed at his family. "Thank you," he told them, "for being here. All of you. It's more than I deserve, and I'm grateful." His brothers shook their heads, dismissing the validity of his words. And then, as if they had arranged it beforehand, they both let loose with an identical whoop of joy. Everyone laughed, and with tears in her eyes, Elise stood on her tiptoes and kissed her brand new husband one more time. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.